One related to production and the other about dried. So first, having the mushrooms in the containers versus the bags, does that also make it a lot easier for harvesting? And do either of you take advantage of multiple flushes from one specimen that maybe you don't on others? And then second question, if you could talk a little bit about dried mushrooms and you know, as far as perhaps this goes to the chef, perhaps for when you rehydrate them, if there's any tricks there to bring out some of the flavors. I can tend to always tell when something's been rehydrated and don't prefer it as much as something fresh.
Okay, let me answer the question on the multiple flushes. Part of we are an certified organic farm, and part of the process is trying to get as much mushrooms as we can before the mushroom fly wants to infest in the what we're growing. And so because we don't use anything that would, you know, kill the mushroom fly, and it's a little gnat that is actually attracted to the smell of the mushrooms. So we actually do get second flushes on some of our mushrooms. The oyster mushroom right there. If you take a look at it, that bag is slit and the mushrooms go out. And then after we get the first flush, we flip it around and get a flush out of the second side. But oysters are very fast growing mushroom. Shiitake has a 13-week incubation to begin with, and then when we take it out of the bag completely, it's because we can get mushrooms on all sides. And that mushroom, actually my son, who just graduated from Davis in June, is determined we are going to be getting multiple flushes off of everything, which is not so good for you and your field trips. Okay. But, and that's one of the things that he's actually really working on, different things that can be done with those blocks without using another bag. He's putting them in kind of trays like this with lids for the oysters to get more flushes. So some of them we can get a second flush on. The yellow oyster, which is that kind of bright canary oyster, we break that up and just put it in a bed and cover it with plastic and take it off, and we get a whole nother flush in the bed. And it's a tricky time factor on getting things in and getting them out, and also whether you get enough yield that it makes worth it to hang on to that, you know, to hang on to that block.
I guess it was the second part of the question on, I guess, dried versus fresh. Yeah, I can tell, you know, like, a lot of times you'll see porcinis reconstituted and you'll see them floating around. I'm not a big fan of that. What I'll do is, for certain mushrooms like that, I'll like pulverize them into a powder and use them in sauces and soups and stuff of that nature, or add them like. The other night I just cooked some normal button mushrooms and I had some porcini powder, and it really infused it with that porcini flavor. But certain mushrooms like black chanterelles and morels in particular, when they rehydrate, obviously not the same as fresh, but pretty close to fresh, and can be used. You could use the flesh, you know, at least for my palate, I like them, you know, I'm close to on par with its fresh counterpart. But some of those larger other mushrooms, and shiitake is the same way. I mean, it's a different mushroom than fresh versus dried, but they certainly have their uses. And I always, if I at the restaurant, reconstitute my mushrooms in vegetable stock, so I can then strain it out, because a lot of times some sediment and dirt might sink to the bottom, and I'll strain that out, and I got this wonderful mushroom stock to use. So hopefully that gets in the ballpark.
Go ahead. I have a quick question about waste. You briefly talked about it, but I don't think I got it. So in commercial production, you have these that stock that you grow mushrooms from, and once you're done with it, besides making canned happy, so can you tell me a little bit more what happens to it? Does it go to landfill ever, or does it really find a way to?
No, it goes into in organic composting gets sent out to organic farms. And so it goes to, there's a vegetable grower in Watsonville, not far from us, High Ground Organics, and he loves the compost that comes in. So that's, but it actually does sit in our farm and compost down until it becomes a really nice, rich, loomy type soil, and very dark.
Yeah, ours actually goes straight to the winery, so the vineyards. We're talking to a lot of people, they want to bag it and sell it, so it's a very good soil and memory.
Do you have a question, sir?
Yes. I've never visited a mushroom farm, but I'd like to now. I have a question about nature versus your farm. I'm a little confused. When you establish a line of mushroom species, shiitake or whatever, do you have to, after you harvest it, do you have to reinvigorate that line with a natural harvest of spores from, or do you just keep that line going indefinitely in the farm?
Well, we maintain a spawn culture in our lab, so we have liquid nitrogen, we have minus 150-degree refrigerator. So our, like the yeast culture for chefs, they keep their own yeast. And our mushroom is the same. So you have some master lines of bottles. Each one you can take out and you can extend 10 generations.
But every once in a while, don't you want to infuse that biodiversity, that genetic diversity from nature back into your line?
Well, what we do is very simple. We take a tissue culture on some mushroom that grows out really well.
Right.
So we take a tissue culture of that and kind of bring it back. So it's a selection, more of a visual selection. But we can look at the yield. If the yield is starting to go down, we know it's run its course. Then we can go back to the same generation, the second tube, we bring it out. So it's always there. So if we have a good line to start, we make a lot of copies of that. So it's really a cloning process.
I was just going to say, yeah.
It's a cloning.
Yeah, we do the same thing. If we have, say, a particular, block that's producing really nicely, then we'll send that block into the clean room, and our lab guy will then make a tissue culture from that one. And so you start with a petri dish, back in the science days when you had the little agar petri dish, and you introduce some of that actual mushroom tissue into that, and then that petri dish gets cut into 10 pieces and put into a flask with some grain, and then that flask gets divided into 10 more into a bag, and by the time that one petri dish will then inoculate 1,000 bags, because each time we move it into the next substrate of sawdust or grain, whatever it is, then that eventually becomes the spawn.
And also it's a question of domestication. Usually it's like growing orchids. You can have crosses and come up with many phenotypes. Only one or two is desirable. So in a way, our mushroom is successful in the bottle is because they are the good isolate that we found. So we have to really bring it through many years. Otherwise, they would die off, and you would have to look hard for the next cultivar that is adaptable to this process.
Yeah.
And depending on where you're growing, certain, what somebody who's growing shiitake, say, in Minnesota, may not have the same luck I have, a half a mile from the ocean in Moss Landing. And so, you can buy different strains of mushroom around, the cultures are out there, but it doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be good for the environment that you're growing them in.
So a lot of this is exactly the same it is for plants or animal husbandry. After you get a certain breed of something, other people are also breeding new things, and maybe your breed was good back in 1940 and it was really productive and so forth, but somebody else has come out with white peaches now, and man, those are sure sweet and really nice, but then they're kind of delicate and they don't last long, but then somebody else is coming out with those breeds. They're always, but maybe somebody wants to have that old one they remember as a kid. As long as there's a market for it, then those things stay. So it wouldn't really make any difference whether it's mushrooms, and also each species is different, so it might be that something is good for really a long time. Others, they get what's called senescence very quickly, and so you basically have to go to the wild or have to go look and see the latest breeds that are out there and pick a different one. But it's being bred for taste, but it's also being bred for production.
Right.
So you just because it tastes good doesn't mean you're going to be able to produce it through the trade and get it on the market. So I mean, you got to balance it all out, and that's why the distribution system is often what's being bred for, as opposed to the taste that you get in the market of anything.
So one of the things that we haven't really touched on here is about foraging. We've talked a lot about production, and so without spilling your secrets, if you would share with us here some of the places we could go and look for mushrooms and what we could expect to find in and around San Francisco Bay Area.
There's lots of places, and as the saying goes, if I told you where my patch is, where I'd have to kill you. So, no, we have lots of places, and if you would like to, I'm leery about inviting this many people, but next Sunday we have our last day of the mushroom class. If you'd like to come and join us on that day, we're having a big potluck, so you must, interest fee is a potluck, so you have to come. It's 11 to 3 at Merritt Community College Landscape Horticulture Department, and we will try and take a foray there. If you come on our foray, you may not pick on our campus. You have to go and find your own territories, but you will learn about the ecological things that you're looking for and so forth, the conditions and things like that. It may well be that even now, I just checked today and there's hardly anything out. We're still a little early in the season. So last year at this time, we were picking lots and lots of chanterelles and candy caps and things like that in the hill country around the Oakland Hills. If you want to find places, you can go in the San Francisco. Lots of people go along the boulevards, 35th Avenue boulevards. 19th and 35th, both of those are irrigated during the summertime. So you can often find porcinis growing on the pine trees, popping right up in the summertime. You can go to there this time of the year and you'll find porcinis. You'll often find Agaricus augustus, the prince. There's quite a few of them along those pine tree boulevards in San Francisco. Golden Gate Park has lots of good picking areas. If you go under, you like those shaggies, you can go underneath Monterey cypress trees and find them in the depths there. Along with Crissy Field is a good place to get shaggy manes. If you go in the morning, like you're walking your dog, that's about the time you walk the dog, then you go eat breakfast, you can pick a bunch of shaggy manes. Because if you wait till the afternoon, they're all going to be turned to ink. So you have to get them early.
Wow.
So, and a lot of these places you have to be the earliest person out there. The early bird gets the mushroom because the Italians are out picking them or the Russians are out picking them. They like them a lot. So Salt Point State Park is the only place in Northern California, the state park, that you can pick in 5 pounds per day per person per park. So if it's allowed in that park, if it's not allowed in that park, you'll see a sign posted at the park entrance that you cannot pick. And in all of Northern California, it's pretty stressful on the rangers and things like that, so they have rules about that. So most places, it's a statewide rule, 5 pounds per person per day per park is what you can pick. Just as long, the same as with, it's 50 pounds for driftwood. But because they're mushrooms and there's a lot of pressure, Salt Point gets a lot of pressure on it, but it's still a great place to go pick mushrooms. It hasn't diminished any. However, we would like to open it up so you can pick at any park so there's not so much pressure on one park, because with all those people trampling out there, might not be hurting the mushrooms, but you know, there's a lot of people pressure on one park just for that. If you go in the East Bay Hills, almost anywhere along Skyline, the Skyline on the peninsula and the Skyline in the East Bay Hills, that's a great place to go along there. You can find porcinis under the pine trees, you can find chanterelles and candy caps under the oak trees. You can also find death caps that are out there. So before you go running around looking for things and poisoning yourself, I am going to do the notorious.
Did you do that? Did you bring that death
yes,
cap?
there's a death cap in there if you want to pull it out. You must absolutely positively identify your mushrooms correctly. If you are trying a new mushroom, you could very well this is a death cap. It was on display at the Fungus Fair. It was laying on its side, so it's a little distorted. You can't really tell the color. It's typically an olive color on the top, olive green. It's oftentimes, let's say, some of the problems with this is that when you have a mushroom, that you're picking a lot of mushrooms and you pot, let's say you go out in the territory and you pick all the mushrooms of the one species, there'll be a bell curve. In the center is all the classic, the most that look the best, that's the classic type. Well, you kind of get out to the edge of the bell curve and maybe it doesn't look quite like a death cap anymore. And you have a bell curve over here of that edible Caliptrata. It's another edible Amanita, but sometimes they look a little, so when the two bell curves kind